The whole room knew how this fight would end. Every single person was wrong. Because what they didn't know was that Amara Cole didn't lose her leg in an accident. She lost it becoming someone they should have never challenged. She'd been a waitress for 8 months now, and she'd learned that showing fear in a room full of criminals was like bleeding in shark-infested waters. She bent down with practiced ease, her carbon fiber prosthetic clicking softly as she shifted her weight, and began picking up the jagged pieces of whiskey glass with gloved hands. The drunk man who'd thrown it mumbled something that might have been an apology, but Amara didn't look up. He never did. Because the moment you made eye contact in a place like Crimson Vault, you became memorable, and memorable people in underground lounges had a habit of disappearing. She moved through the dimly lit room like a shadow, her tray balanced perfectly despite the prosthetic leg that replaced everything below her left knee. Most customers stared when they first saw her. Some whispered. Others looked away quickly, their faces twisted with pity or discomfort. Amara had stopped caring about their reactions years ago. She'd chosen this job specifically because it kept her moving, kept her active, kept her from becoming the thing she feared most. Someone who let a missing limb define their entire existence. The lounge paid well, asked no questions, and most importantly, no one here treated her like she was made of glass. They treated her like she was invisible, which was exactly what she wanted. But tonight, invisibility was about to become impossible. The doors burst open at exactly midnight, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Victor Romano entered like a storm given human form, 6 feet of controlled violence wrapped in an expensive Italian suit. His men followed in a tight formation, their hands resting casually near their waistbands where everyone knew they carried weapons. The regular customers suddenly found their drinks fascinating. The pianist in the corner missed a note. Even the bartender, a former boxer who'd killed 2 men with his bare hands, tensed visibly. Victor Romano wasn't just any crime boss. He was the crime boss, the man who controlled everything from the docks to the city council, and he had a reputation for being as unpredictable as he was dangerous. Amara was carrying a full tray of drinks when Victor's group settled into the largest booth near the center of the room. She could smell the alcohol on them from 10 feet away. They'd been drinking before they arrived, celebrating something, their voices loud and careless in a way that made her stomach tighten. She approached their table with her professional smile locked in place, the one that said she was here to serve, nothing more. Victor was sprawled in his seat like a king on a throne, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his dark eyes glazed with the kind of drunk confidence that made men do stupid things. "Gentlemen, what can I get you tonight?" Amara asked, her voice steady and neutral. Victor's gaze slid over her slowly, lingering on her prosthetic leg with the kind of cruel curiosity that made her jaw clench. Well, he drawled loud enough for the entire lounge to hear. "Look what we have here. Tell me, sweetheart, how does a girl like you end up working in a place like this? What happened? Couldn't keep up with the other waitresses at the fancy restaurants." His men laughed on cue, the sound harsh and mocking. Amara's fingers tightened on her tray, but her expression remained perfectly calm. "I'll get you our whiskey menu," she said, turning to leave. Wait, Victor called out, his voice dripping with amusement. "I'm just making conversation. No need to be so sensitive. I'm actually impressed. Most people with your condition would just give up, you know? Stay home. Collect disability checks. But here you are hobbling around with drinks. That takes guts. Or maybe desperation. Which is it?" The lounge had gone completely silent. Every eye was on their table now, watching to see how this would play out. Amara turned back slowly, meeting Victor's bloodshot eyes with a steady gaze. "Your drinks, sir. What would you like?" Victor leaned forward, his smile widening. "I like her. Or maybe she's just used to people staring." He turned to his men. "You know what? I bet she's actually pretty strong. Probably had to compensate for the missing leg, right? Built up the rest of her body. That's how it works, isn't it?" He looked back at Amara, his eyes gleaming with drunken inspiration. "I'm curious now. Show us how tough you are. Come on. Flex or something. Let's see what you're working with under that uniform." Amara felt heat rise in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "I'm here to take your order, not to entertain you. Now what would you like to drink?" Victor's expression darkened slightly. He wasn't used to being dismissed, even politely. "You know what your problem is. You're too serious. Loosen up. I'm just having fun." He reached for the whiskey bottle one of his men had placed on the table, pouring himself a generous glass with unsteady hands. But fine. If you won't show us what you've got willingly, maybe we need a little motivation. He picked up his glass and held it out toward Amara in a mock toast. Here's to the toughest one-legged waitress in the city. His men laughed again, louder this time, emboldened by their boss's cruelty. Then Victor made a show of taking a long drink, his eyes never leaving Amara's face, waiting for her to crack. He didn't. She simply stood there, tray in hand, waiting for him to finish his performance so she could take their order and leave. But Victor wasn't done. He was drunk, bored, and surrounded by men he needed to impress. And Amara, with her calm refusal to be baited, had become a challenge he couldn't ignore. You know what? Victor said, setting his glass down with exaggerated care. I bet you can't even run. Can you? With that fake leg. I bet you're slow as hell. Probably why you work here instead of somewhere nicer. You can't keep up with the pace. He looked at his men, grinning. Someone time her. I want to see how long it takes her to get from here to the bar and back. One of his men looked uncomfortable. Boss, maybe we should just time her. Victor's voice had gone cold despite the alcohol, and his man immediately pulled out his phone, holding it up like he was actually going to do it. Amara's professional composure was cracking now, the anger she'd been suppressing starting to leak through. I'm not here for your entertainment, she said quietly. I'm here to serve drinks. Either order something or I'll send someone else to your table. Victor stood up suddenly, and the movement was so abrupt that Amara instinctively stepped back. He swayed slightly, catching himself on the table, his face flushed with alcohol and indignation. You think you're better than me? He said, his voice rising. You think you can just walk away when I'm talking to you? You're a waitress. A crippled waitress in a criminal bar. You're nobody. He reached for the whiskey bottle again, but his drunk hand misjudged the distance. The bottle tipped and amber liquid spilled across the table, cascading over the edge directly onto Victor's expensive suit pants. For a moment, everyone froze. Victor looked down at the spreading stain, his face going from flush to bright red. His men held their breath. The entire lounge seemed to lean back, sensing the danger in the air like animals before a storm. You, Victor said slowly, his eyes snapping up to Amara. You bumped the table. I didn't, Amara said calmly. You knocked it over yourself. Victor's jaw clenched. Are you calling me a liar? You think because you're disabled you can get away with ruining a $5,000 suit and then calling me a liar? He took a step toward her, using his height to try to intimidate her. You know what? I was going to let you off easy. Just have a little fun at your expense. But now you owe me. Amara didn't step back this time. She stood her ground, her tray still held steady, her eyes locked on his. I don't owe you anything. You spilled your own drink. Now either sit down and order something or leave. The lounge gasped collectively. No one spoke to Victor Romano like that. No one. His face contorted with rage and alcohol-fueled indignation, and for a moment Amara thought he might actually hit her. But then something else flickered in his eyes. A different kind of cruelty, one that came with an idea. His angry expression slowly morphed into a dangerous smile. You've got spirit. I'll give you that, he said, his voice dropping to something almost conversational. You know what? I like you. You remind me of a fighter. All tough talk and attitude. So here's what we're going to do. He spread his arms wide, addressing the entire lounge now. This waitress thinks she's so strong, so capable, so equal to everyone else despite the missing leg. So let's test that theory. You me. Right here. Right now. A fight. Just for fun. The room erupted in murmurs. Amara's heart was pounding, but she kept her face neutral. I'm working, she said simply. Oh, come on, Victor said, his voice dripping with mock friendliness. What's the matter? All that talk about not being defined by your disability, and now you're going to hide behind your apron? I thought you were tough. I thought you were capable. Or were you just pretending? Maybe that's why you work here. It's the only place desperate enough to hire you, and you know if you step out of line, you'll lose even this pathetic job. His men were watching nervously now, and Amara could see some of them wanted to intervene but didn't dare. The other customers had gone completely still, waiting to see how this would end. The bartender had his hand under the counter, probably on a weapon, but he wasn't moving either. Everyone knew that interfering with Victor Romano was a good way to end up in the river. Amara felt something cold and sharp crystallize in her chest. She'd spent 4 years rebuilding herself. 4 years proving that she was more than her disability. 4 years refusing to be treated as less than human. And now this drunk, arrogant man was going to humiliate her in front of a room full of people just because he was bored and she'd had the audacity to stand up to him. The old Amara would have apologized. Would have backed down. Would have done anything to avoid confrontation. But the old Amara had died in the fire that took her leg. "Fine," she said quietly. "We fight. But when I win you apologize. Out loud. In front of everyone here. You apologize for mocking me, for assuming I'm weak, and for blaming me for your own clumsiness." Victor's eyes widened slightly in surprise before his grin returned even wider than before. "When you win." He laughed, a harsh bark that echoed through the silent lounge. "Oh, sweetheart. I was going to go easy on you, but now you've made this interesting. Deal. And when I win, because let's be real, I'm going to win, you quit this job. You admit that you can't handle it. That you're not cut out for the real world. And you thank me for teaching you a lesson about knowing your place." "I won't lose," Amara said, and something in her voice made Victor's smile falter just slightly. The lounge erupted into motion. Customers scrambled away from the center of the room, creating a crude circle. The bartender looked like he wanted to call the police but knew that would only make things worse. Victor's men cleared their table, and Victor himself stood in the center of the makeshift arena, rolling up his sleeves with theatrical precision. He was bigger than Amara by at least 80 pounds, trained in multiple fighting styles, and had probably broken more bones than she had in her entire body. This should have been an execution disguised as entertainment. Amara set down her tray and removed her server's apron with deliberate calm. Beneath it, she wore a simple black shirt and dark jeans that allowed for full range of motion. Her prosthetic was top of the line, a running blade she'd modified for everyday use, capable of bearing her full weight and more. She'd spent 3 years in physical therapy after the explosion, 3 years of grueling work that had rebuilt not just her body but her entire understanding of movement, balance, and leverage. Most people saw the prosthetic and assumed she was fragile, limited, broken. They had no idea that losing her leg had forced her to become 10 times more precise with every other part of her body. Victor stepped into the circle with the swagger of someone who'd never lost a fight. The alcohol made him sloppy, overconfident, dangerous in unpredictable ways. He cracked his knuckles and bounced on his toes like a boxer, showing off for his men. "Last chance to back out," he called to Amara. "I really don't want to hurt you. Well, actually, after that little stunt with calling me a liar, maybe I do. But I'll try to be gentle." Amara didn't respond. She simply moved to the opposite side of the circle, her breathing steady, her mind clear. She'd been in this space before. The space where violence became inevitable and the only choice left was how you responded to it. The memories tried to surface. Gunfire, screaming, flames eating through the warehouse wall, the weight of 3 strangers she'd pulled towards safety, the explosion that had ripped through her leg like 1,000 knives. She pushed the memories away. They had no place here. Not now. Victor moved first, charging forward with drunken aggression. His right fist shot out in a wild haymaker designed to end the fight quickly and brutally. Amara didn't try to block it. Instead, she shifted her weight onto her prosthetic and pivoted, letting his momentum carry him past her. His fist whistled through empty air and his forward motion made him stumble. The crowd murmured in surprise. Victor caught himself, spinning around with anger replacing his amusement. "Lucky," he snarled, coming at her again. This time he threw a combination, jab, cross, hook, meant to overwhelm her. But the alcohol made him telegraphic, obvious, slow in ways a sober fighter would never be. Amara read each punch before it came, her years of adaptive training allowing her to process movement patterns instantly. She slipped the jab, ducked under the cross, and stepped inside the hook, getting so close to Victor that he couldn't generate any power. For a moment they were almost chest to chest, and she could smell the whiskey on his breath, see the shock in his eyes as he realized she wasn't just surviving, she was controlling the fight. Amara pushed off his chest with both hands, creating space, and Victor stumbled backward. His men were silent now, their earlier laughter completely gone. The other customers leaned forward, sensing that something impossible was happening. Victor's face was red with exertion and rage, his expensive suit rumpled and stained, his confidence cracking with each failed attempt to land a punch. "Stop moving," he shouted, frustrated now. "Stand still and fight like a—" He didn't finish the sentence because Amara finally went on offense. She feinted left with her shoulder and Victor, drunk and desperate, took the bait. His weight shifted to intercept her, his guard dropping slightly. Amara pivoted on her prosthetic with perfect balance and swept his front leg with her biological foot. It was a simple technique, one she'd practiced 10,000 times during her rehabilitation, using her prosthetic as an anchor point that gave her leverage that two biological legs never could. Victor's leg went out from under him, his center of gravity completely wrong, his arms windmilling uselessly. Victor Romano, the most feared crime boss in the city, the man who'd built an empire on violence and intimidation, crashed to the marble floor with a sound that echoed like thunder. For several seconds nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Victor lay on his back, the wind knocked out of him, staring up at the chandelier with an expression of absolute disbelief. Amara stood over him, not breathing hard, not even sweating, her prosthetic planted firmly on the ground. The silence in the lounge was deafening. Victor's men had their hands on their weapons but they didn't draw them. They were too shocked. The bartender was frozen with his phone halfway to his ear. The customers looked like they were witnessing something that would become legend. The night a one-legged waitress beat Victor Romano in front of everyone. Victor rolled onto his side, gasping, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Amara extended her hand to help him up. It was a gesture both gracious and devastating, and everyone in the room understood the message. She hadn't just won. She dominated him so completely that she could afford to show him mercy. Victor stared at her hand like it was a snake. His face went through several emotions, rage, humiliation, confusion, before settling into something harder to read. He slapped her hand away and scrambled to his feet on his own, swaying slightly, his suit ruined, his pride shattered. His men watched him with barely concealed anxiety, waiting to see if he would order them to hurt her, to shoot her, to make this right through violence the way he always did. The entire lounge held its breath. Amara stood perfectly still, her eyes locked on Victor's, refusing to show even a hint of fear. She'd won the fight, but she hadn't won yet. Not until he kept his word. And men like Victor Romano didn't become crime bosses by keeping their word when it didn't suit them. Victor's jaw worked silently. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. For a moment, Amara was certain he was going to lash out, that this would end with gunfire and blood. But then something strange happened. Victor looked around at the watching faces. His men, the customers, the staff, and seemed to really see them for the first time. He saw their shock, their fear, their fascination. And maybe, beneath his rage and humiliation, some small part of him that was still capable of shame recognized that every person in this room had just watched him get beaten by someone he'd viciously mocked. "I underestimated you," Victor said finally, his voice rough. It wasn't an apology. Not yet. "You did," Amara agreed quietly. "Now keep your word." The tension in the room ratcheted higher. Victor's men tensed. One of them took a half step forward, ready to intervene, but Victor held up a hand to stop him. He looked at Amara for a long moment and something in his expression shifted, like seeing a puzzle piece finally click into place. When he spoke again, his voice was loud enough for everyone to hear, though it clearly cost him something to say it. "I was wrong," Victor said, each word seeming to scrape his throat raw. "I mocked you. Made assumptions about your strength based on your disability. I blamed you for my own clumsiness. I was wrong. And I apologize." He paused, then added more quietly, "You're tougher than 90% of the men I know. Including me." The lounge remained frozen in shocked silence. Victor Romano had just apologized. Publicly. To a waitress. The world felt like it had tilted slightly off its axis. Amara nodded once, accepting his words, then turned to pick up her apron. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up to her, but she didn't let anyone see. She'd won. She'd made her point. Now she just wanted to finish her shift and go home. "Wait," Victor called out, his voice hoarse. "Who are you? Where did you learn to fight like that?" Amara paused, her back still to him. She'd never told anyone at Crimson Vault about her past. Never explained the scars that ran up her left side, barely visible under her uniform. Never talked about the nightmares that still woke her up some nights, smelling smoke and hearing screams. But something in Victor's voice, genuine curiosity mixed with what might have been respect, made her turn around. "My name is Amara Cole," she said slowly. 4 years ago I was training for emergency response. One night a gang hit went bad in a warehouse district. I was walking home from class when I heard gunfire. Saw people trapped inside. 3 strangers I'd never met, choking on smoke, unable to find the exit. She took a breath, the memories flooding back despite her best efforts to keep them at bay. I went in. Pulled them out one by one. Was going back for a 4th when the whole building exploded. Took my leg. Nearly took my life. Victor's expression had completely changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like awe. His men were silent, their faces reflecting various shades of shame as they realized they'd been laughing at someone who'd literally run into a burning building to save lives. "The doctor said I'd never walk normally again," Amara continued, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "Said I should accept my limitations. Learn to live with less. But I didn't lose my leg. I survived losing it. There's a difference. So I trained. Every single day. Physical therapy until I could barely stand. Adaptive combat techniques to relearn balance. Core strengthening to compensate. I rebuilt myself from nothing because I refused to let one bad night define my entire existence." She looked directly at Victor. "I took this job because I wanted to prove I could do anything anyone else could do. I'm not here because I'm desperate or because no one else would hire me. I'm here because I chose to be. And no drunk, arrogant man is going to make me question that choice." The words hung in the air like a challenge and a declaration. Victor stood there, his expensive suit stained with whiskey and humiliation, and seemed to be processing something that had never occurred to him before. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You didn't lose your leg. You survived losing it. You're not disabled. You're rebuilt. Stronger than before." "Different than before," Amara corrected. "Not stronger. Not weaker. Different. And different doesn't mean less." She picked up her tray and walked back toward the bar, leaving Victor standing in the center of the makeshift arena. The lounge slowly came back to life, conversations resuming, drinks being poured, the pianist tentatively starting a new song. But everything had changed. Everyone who'd been there that night would carry the story with them, would tell it to others, would remember the night Victor Romano learned that strength had nothing to do with what you hadn't lost and everything to do with what you built from the wreckage. Victor didn't leave. He sat back down at his booth, waving away his men's concerned questions, and ordered another drink. But this time, when Amara brought it to him, he said, "Thank you," quietly, meeting her eyes with something that wasn't quite respect yet but was moving in that direction. And when he left hours later, he left a tip that was 3 times the cost of his entire bill. That should have been the end of it. One strange night. One humbling experience. One apology extracted under duress. But Victor Romano came back the next night. And the night after that. He didn't mock anyone. Didn't start fights. Just sat in his booth, ordered his drinks, and watched Amara work with an expression that seemed almost thoughtful. At first she found it unsettling, having a crime boss's attention was never a good thing. But gradually she realized he wasn't watching her because he wanted something from her. He was watching her because he was trying to understand something about himself. 3 weeks after the fight, Victor approached her during her break. He looked different somehow, less arrogant, more uncertain, like someone who'd had the foundation of their worldview shaken. "Can I ask you something?" he said, and the man who'd drunkenly mocked her was completely absent from his voice now. "When you went into that building, when you pulled those people out, did you think about the risk? Did you calculate whether they were worth saving?" Amara considered the question carefully. "No," she admitted. "I just knew people needed help. Their lives mattered more than my safety. The risk was irrelevant." Victor nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something he'd been wondering about. "I've spent my entire life calculating who's useful and who's not. Who's strong and who's weak. Who deserves respect and who deserves contempt. And I was completely wrong about you. Not just wrong, blind. I looked at you and saw what you were missing instead of what you'd built." He paused, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily. "I want to do something. Make up for being an ass. For people like you. People who've had to rebuild themselves. Would you help me figure out what that looks like?" That conversation led to another. And another. Slowly, carefully, like two wounded animals learning to trust each other, Amara and Victor began to talk. Really talk. She learned that beneath the violence and arrogance was someone who'd never had a choice about the life he'd been born into, who'd been raised to believe that cruelty was strength and compassion was weakness. He learned that disability wasn't the end of potential but often the beginning of a different kind of strength, one that required more courage than most people could imagine. Victor started changing. The transformation was subtle at first. He fired the men who'd laughed at Amara that night, telling them he didn't want people who mistook cruelty for humor working for him. He stopped settling disputes with immediate violence, started listening before reacting. His criminal organization began shifting focus away from the most brutal enterprises, redirecting toward operations that, while still illegal, didn't actively destroy innocent lives. It wasn't redemption. Victor was still a criminal, still dangerous, but it was evolution. Growth toward something that might eventually become better. And Amara found herself changing too. The walls she'd built around herself after the explosion started coming down just a little. She accepted Victor's offer to fund adaptive combat training programs. Let him walk her home after late shifts, his presence surprisingly comforting despite his reputation. Even laughed at his attempts at humor, including the night he tried to help her adjust her prosthetic and accidentally tangled himself in her crutches. She'd been balancing on one leg, the prosthetic strap giving her trouble, when he'd leaned in to kiss her for the first time. The moment should have been romantic. Instead, she'd wobbled, grabbed the crutches for support and accidentally whacked him in the shoulder with one. They'd both frozen before bursting into laughter, and somehow that imperfect moment had felt more real than any perfect kiss could have been. 6 months after the fight that changed everything, Amara gave her notice at Crimson Vault. Not because Victor asked her to. Not because she couldn't handle the work anymore. But because she'd found something better. Purpose that went beyond survival. She opened an adaptive self-defense training center funded by anonymous donations that everyone knew came from Victor Romano's accounts. The center specialized in teaching people with disabilities how to defend themselves, how to move with confidence, how to rebuild not just their bodies but their sense of self-worth and capability. Amara was a natural instructor. Her own experience gave her insights no able-bodied teacher could match. She knew what it felt like to have people underestimate you. Knew the frustration of having to relearn everything from scratch. Knew the triumph of proving that different didn't mean less. Her students could see the truth in how she moved, how she adapted, how she refused to accept any excuse for giving up. Not from herself and not from them. The first seminar drew 30 students. The second drew 50. By the third month there was a waiting list stretching months into the future. People came from across the state to learn from the woman who'd fought a mafia boss and won. But Amara never told that story. He didn't need to. Her students could see everything they needed to know in how she carried herself, how she transformed her perceived limitation into unexpected strength, how she'd built a life of meaning from the ashes of tragedy. Victor attended the 6-month anniversary celebration, standing at the back of the crowded training room like he didn't quite belong. Amara spotted him halfway through her speech about resilience and adaptation, and their eyes met across the floor. He smiled, not the cruel, mocking smile of the drunk man who'd challenged her, but something genuine, proud, and maybe even a little awed. She smiled back, feeling warmth spread through her chest. They still hadn't defined what they were to each other. Hadn't put labels on the quiet dinners, the late-night phone calls, the way he kept a photo from her first seminar in his wallet. But whatever it was felt right. It felt earned through honesty and change rather than demanded or expected. After the last student left and the celebration wound down, Victor approached her. "You did it," he said simply, looking around at the equipment, the adaptive workout stations, the walls covered with photos of successful graduates. "You changed everything." Amara shook her head. "We did it. You funded this place. Made it possible." "I just wrote checks," Victor said. "You gave people hope. You showed them that what everyone else sees as an ending can be a beginning. That's not something money can buy." He paused, his expression becoming more serious. "My father used to say that strength was about domination. About crushing anyone weak enough to be crushed. But you showed me something different. Real strength isn't about what you can take from others or how many people fear you. It's about what you can build despite everything trying to tear you down. It's about getting knocked down and choosing to stand back up, even when standing takes 10 times more effort than it used to." Amara stepped closer to him, her prosthetic clicking softly against the training mat. "You know what the best part is?" she said quietly. "4 years ago when I woke up in that hospital without my leg, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. But if I hadn't lost my leg, I never would have learned adaptive combat. Never would have taken that waitressing job. Never would have met a drunk, arrogant crime boss who needed someone to knock him on his ass and teach him what real strength looks like." She smiled. "Never would have started this place. Sometimes what breaks us is exactly what we need to become who we're meant to be." Victor reached out and took her hand, his grip gentle despite the scars that marked his knuckles from years of violence. "So what happens now?" he asked. Amara squeezed back, feeling the calluses on his palm that matched her own. "Now we keep building. Keep growing. Keep proving that underestimating people based on what they're missing is the biggest mistake anyone can make." She looked up at him, this dangerous man who'd learned to see the world through different eyes, and felt something she hadn't felt in years: genuine hope for the future. "Thank you for being stupid enough to challenge me that night." Victor laughed, the sound echoing through the empty training center. "Best mistake I ever made. Though I'm never going to live it down with my men. Do you know they still call you the boss killer behind my back?" "Good," Amara said, grinning. "Maybe it'll make them think twice before underestimating the next person they meet." They stood there in comfortable silence, two broken people who'd found a way to be whole together, not by fixing each other, but by accepting that brokenness could become its own kind of strength. Outside, the city continued its endless dance of light and shadow, crime and justice, weakness and strength. But inside the training center, in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Never underestimate someone based on what you think they lack. The person you mock today might be the person who teaches you the most important lesson of your life tomorrow. Disability is not inability. It's a different kind of ability, one that requires courage most people will never understand. The strongest people aren't those who've never fallen. They're the ones who fell, lost something precious, and chose to rebuild themselves piece by piece, refusing to accept that their story was over. Do you enjoy this story? Please subscribe and tell me where you are watching from in the comments.